What happens when a globally recognized Hollywood star walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a light conversation, but instead finds herself in the middle of a tense, unexpected debate? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera opens on the bright, familiar set of The View, the audience already buzzing with energy as the hosts sit around the table. There's laughter, a bit of chatter, and then the tone shifts slightly as the introduction begins. "All right, everyone," one of the co-hosts says with a smile, glancing toward the audience. "Our next guest is an Oscar-nominated actress, producer, and someone who has taken over Hollywood with back-to-back hits. Please welcome Margot Robbie." The audience erupts into applause as Margot walks out, smiling, waving politely, clearly comfortable in the spotlight. She takes her seat, exchanging greetings with each host, including Sunny Hostin, who gives a polite but measured smile. "Thank you for having me," Margot says, adjusting slightly in her chair. "It's really nice to be here." "Of course," another host jumps in warmly. "We've been wanting you here for a while now. You've had such an incredible run recently." Margot nods. "It's been a busy time, yeah, but a good one." The conversation starts off exactly as expected, light, easy, almost rehearsed in its rhythm. They talk about her latest project, her role as a producer, and how she balances creative control with acting. "So you're not just in front of the camera anymore," one host says. "You're behind it, making decisions, shaping stories." Margot smiles. "Yeah, I think for me it's about having more input, being part of telling stories that maybe wouldn't get told otherwise." Sunny leans slightly forward at that point, her tone still calm, but more deliberate. "When you say stories that wouldn't get told otherwise, what exactly do you mean by that?" There's a subtle shift in the room, not dramatic, but noticeable. Margot pauses for just a fraction of a second. "I guess stories that are more inclusive," she replies. "Different perspectives, different voices, things that reflect the world more accurately." Sunny nods, but her expression tightens just a bit. "Inclusive in what sense?" "Because Hollywood has been saying that for a long time, but many would argue the results haven't exactly matched the promises." A few audience members murmur softly. The other hosts glance at each other, sensing the direction this could go. Margot keeps her composure. "That's fair. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect. It's definitely still a work in progress. But I think there's been movement." Sunny doesn't immediately respond. She leans back slightly, then forward again, as if choosing her words carefully. "Movement for who?" she asks. There's a brief silence. Margot blinks, then lets out a small breath. "I think overall, across the board." Sunny tilts her head. "Because from where I'm sitting, it often feels like certain voices still dominate those decisions. And when people talk about inclusion, it sometimes becomes more of a buzzword than a reality." The audience reacts with a mix of applause and hesitation. One of the co-hosts quickly steps in. "I think what Sunny's getting at is, there's still a lot of conversation around who actually gets to tell these stories, right?" Margot nods slowly. "Absolutely. And I don't disagree with that. I think it's important to keep questioning it." Sunny presses gently but firmly. "So how do you personally approach that? As someone now producing films, how do you ensure that it's not just another version of the same system?" Margot shifts slightly in her seat, still composed but clearly more engaged now. "For me, it's about the team," she says. "Who you bring in, who you collaborate with. Making sure there's diversity not just in front of the camera, but behind it too." Sunny responds almost immediately. "But you're still the one in control, right? At the end of the day." There's a slight ripple through the audience. Margot nods. "In some cases, yes." Sunny raises her eyebrows slightly. "So doesn't that create a contradiction? You're advocating for broader representation, but the power still sits with a select few." Another host jumps in, trying to lighten the tone. "This is getting deep early in the morning," she jokes, drawing a bit of laughter from the audience. Margot smiles briefly, but her focus stays on Sunny. "I think it's a fair question," she says. "But I don't think it's an either-or situation. You can use the position you have to open doors for others." Sunny crosses her arms loosely. "If it's done intentionally, yes. But historically, that hasn't always been the case." The energy in the room tightens just a bit more. Margot nods again, this time more firmly. "And that's exactly why people in positions like mine need to be conscious of it. I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but I'm trying to be part of a shift." Sunny watches her closely. "Trying is important," she says. "But impact is what matters." A few audience members clap. Margot doesn't back down. "I agree. And impact takes time. Sunny leans in slightly. Time that some communities feel they've already given. There's a pause, longer this time. One of the co-hosts quickly interjects again. Okay, let's take a second, because I think this is actually a really important conversation, but we also want to hear more about your current project. Margot glances briefly at her, then back at Sunny, as if deciding whether to let the moment pass or continue. Well, it actually connects, Margot says. The project we're working on right now, it's built around a perspective that hasn't really been explored in mainstream film before. Sunny nods, but her expression remains serious. And who's telling that story? Margot answers without hesitation. A diverse team. Writers, directors, people with lived experience connected to the story. Sunny studies her for a moment, then gives a small nod. That's good to hear. But the tension hasn't fully left the table. The audience senses it too. There's a quiet anticipation now, like something just beneath the surface hasn't fully settled. Another host smiles, trying to reset the tone. Well, we're definitely going to get into that project in more detail, because it sounds really exciting. Margot smiles back, but her posture is slightly more guarded now. Sunny glances toward her again, her voice softer this time. I think these conversations matter, especially when people are watching and listening. Margot nods. I agree, but the exchange has clearly left its mark. The camera slowly pulls back as the conversation shifts slightly, but the energy at the table has changed. What started as a routine interview has turned into something more layered, more real. And it's clear this discussion is far from over. The conversation doesn't quite reset the way talk shows usually do. There's a moment where another host smiles, trying to steer things back into safer territory, but the energy at the table has already shifted. You can feel it in the way the audience is quieter now, more attentive, like they're waiting to see where this goes next. So, one of the co-hosts says, leaning in with a lighter tone, let's talk about the film itself. Because from what we've seen, it's already generating a lot of buzz. Margot Robbie nods, welcoming the pivot, at least on the surface. Yeah, it's been amazing to see the response so far. It's a project we've been developing for quite a while. What drew you to it? The host asks. Margot relaxes slightly. Honestly, it was the script. It felt different, like it was saying something meaningful, but in a way that was still entertaining. Before she can continue, Sunny Hostin leans forward again, not interrupting abruptly, but clearly not letting the earlier thread go. But meaningful for who? Sunny asks, her tone calm but precise. There's a small reaction from the audience, some murmurs, a few scattered claps. Margot gives a brief smile, one that looks more controlled now. I'd say for a wide audience. That's always the goal, right? To reach as many people as possible. Sunny nods slowly. That's the goal in theory. But sometimes when something is made for everyone, it ends up not fully representing anyone. A quiet passes through the audience. Another host jumps in gently. I think what Sunny's touching on is that sometimes specificity actually makes a story more powerful. Margot nods. I agree with that. And I think this project does have specificity. It's just presented in a way that's accessible. Sunny tilts her head slightly. Accessible can also mean diluted. The audience reacts again, this time louder, a mix of applause and surprised laughter. Margot lets out a small breath, her composure still intact, but now clearly more engaged. I don't think accessibility and authenticity are mutually exclusive, she says. Sunny responds quickly. They're not, but they can be, depending on who's making the decisions. There's a slight pause. One of the co-hosts looks between them. This is getting interesting, she says, half joking, trying to ease the tension, but not fully interrupting it. Margot shifts in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. Look, I understand the concern, she says, and I think it's valid. But I also think there's a danger in assuming that every project coming out of a major studio is automatically compromised. Sunny doesn't smile this time. I don't think it's an assumption, she says. I think it's based on patterns. That lands a bit heavier. The audience goes quiet again. Margot nods slowly. Patterns can change. Sunny holds her gaze. They can, but usually not without pressure. There's a beat. Another host leans in, trying to bridge the gap. And maybe conversations like this are part of that pressure, right? Sunny nods slightly. Exactly. Margot agrees. I think so too. For a second, it feels like they've found a small point of agreement, but it doesn't fully diffuse the tension. The host who had been moderating smiles and turns back to Margot. Let's talk about your role as a producer, because that's a big shift from just acting. What's been the biggest challenge for you in that transition? Margot takes a moment, clearly appreciating the chance to expand on something less confrontational. I think the responsibility, she says. When you're producing, every decision has a ripple effect. It's not just about your performance anymore. It's about the entire project. Sunny watches her closely, but doesn't interrupt this time. And with that responsibility, Margot continues, comes the opportunity to shape things in a better way. That's something I take seriously. Sunny finally speaks again, her tone softer but still probing. Do you ever feel like there's a limit to how much you can shape, though? Given the system you're working within. Margot pauses, thinking. Of course, she admits. There are always constraints. Budgets, studios, expectations. It's not a free-for-all. Sunny nods. Exactly. So when we talk about change, it's not just about individuals, it's about the structure. Margot leans forward slightly now, matching Sunny's posture. I agree, but individuals still play a role in pushing that structure. Sunny responds almost immediately, as long as they're willing to push. The audience reacts again, this time with a mix of oohs and claps. Margot smiles faintly, but there's a hint of tension behind it. I think I've demonstrated that willingness, she says. Sunny raises an eyebrow, not dismissive, but clearly inviting more. In what ways? She asks. There's a slight shift at the table. One of the hosts glances toward the producers off camera, as if checking how far this should go. But Margot answers. By choosing projects that take risks, she says. By working with new voices. By putting my name behind things that might not be the obvious commercial choice. Sunny nods slowly. And those are important steps, she says. But some would argue that true risk would involve stepping back and letting those voices lead entirely. That line hits differently. The audience reacts louder now, some applause, some surprised murmurs. Margot doesn't respond immediately. She takes a breath. I don't think it has to be one or the other, she says finally. You can support and collaborate without completely stepping away. Sunny leans back slightly. But stepping away can also be a form of support. Another host quickly interjects, sensing the escalation. Okay, I feel like we're getting into a really nuanced conversation here. Sunny nods. We are. Margot adds, and I think it's worth having. There's a brief moment where all the hosts are quiet, which is unusual for a show like The View. The audience is fully locked in now. The moderating host tries again to balance things. I think what's interesting is that both of you are essentially talking about the same goal, but from slightly different angles. Sunny nods. That's fair. Margot agrees. Yeah, but the tension, the host continues carefully, comes from how that goal is achieved. Sunny adds, and who gets to define what success looks like? Margot responds, ideally, it's not just one person defining it. Sunny looks at her, but often it still is. There's another pause. This time it feels heavier. Margot's expression tightens just slightly. I think we're in a transition period, she says. Things aren't perfect, but they're evolving. Sunny responds without hesitation. Transition periods can last a long time. The audience reacts again, this time more subdued but still engaged. One of the hosts lets out a small laugh. This is definitely not the light morning chat we usually have, she says. That gets a bit of laughter, easing the tension just a touch. Margot smiles. I didn't expect it either, she admits. Sunny smiles faintly. Neither did I. But even with that moment of shared acknowledgement, the underlying tension hasn't disappeared. If anything, it feels like it's building, more controlled now, more focused. The conversation hasn't exploded, but it hasn't settled either. And as the camera lingers on the table, it's clear that what started as a simple discussion has turned into something much more layered. Something neither side is fully ready to let go of. There's a brief lull after that exchange. The kind that doesn't usually happen on The View unless something real is unfolding. The audience isn't restless, they're focused. You can feel that everyone is aware this has gone beyond a typical promotional interview. One of the co-hosts exhales lightly and tries to bring in a different angle. I think what's interesting here is that audiences today are a lot more aware. They're questioning what they're watching, who's behind it, all of that. Margot Robbie nods. Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing. Before anyone else can continue, Sunny Hostin leans forward again. But this time, her tone shifts slightly. It's not sharper, but it's more direct, less cushioned. But awareness also means accountability, Sunny says. Margot keeps her gaze steady. Of course. Sunny continues. And accountability means being open to criticism, not just in theory, but in practice. A few audience members clap immediately. Margot nods. I agree with that. Sunny doesn't break eye contact. So let's talk about criticism, she says. Because some of your recent projects have been praised, yes, but they've also been questioned. There's a subtle shift again. One of the co-hosts glances sideways, sensing this could go further than before. Margot answers carefully. Every project gets criticism, she says. That's part of the process. Sunny tilts her head. That's true, but not all criticism is the same. Margot pauses. What do you mean? Sunny doesn't hesitate. I mean criticism about representation, about whose stories are being told, and how. The audience murmurs again. Margot inhales slightly, then responds. I think those conversations are important, and I think people should voice their concerns. Sunny nods once. And when they do you listen? Margot's expression tightens just a little. Not defensive, but more serious now. Yes, she says. I do. Sunny follows up quickly. Even when it challenges your own perspective? Margot answers without hesitation this time. Especially then. There's a small wave of applause. For a moment, it feels like a turning point, but Sunny isn't done. Because sometimes, Sunny continues, what we see in Hollywood is a willingness to listen publicly, but less willingness to actually change anything behind the scenes. That lands harder than anything before. The audience reacts, some clap, others go quiet. One of the hosts interjects, a bit more urgently this time. Okay, I think we should, just for balance, also acknowledge that change does take time. Sunny nods, but doesn't fully yield. It does, but time shouldn't be an excuse. Margot leans forward now, matching Sunny's intensity more clearly than before. I'm not using it as an excuse, she says. I'm saying it's a reality. Sunny responds immediately. And realities can be challenged. There's a noticeable reaction from the audience. This is the most engaged they've been. Margot's tone stays controlled but firmer. And I am challenging them, she says. In the ways that I can. Sunny raises her eyebrows slightly. Within the limits that are comfortable? That question hangs in the air. The other hosts visibly tense. One of them opens her mouth as if to jump in, but stops. Margot doesn't answer right away. She takes a breath, then speaks slowly. I don't think any real change happens without discomfort, she says. So no, I wouldn't say it's about staying comfortable. Sunny studies her for a moment, then nods slightly. That's fair, she says. But discomfort for who? There's a ripple through the audience again. Margot's voice stays steady. For everyone involved, she replies. Sunny shakes her head just a little. Not always, she says. Sometimes the people with the most power experience the least discomfort. That line draws a strong reaction, applause, a few mms from the audience. Margot doesn't smile this time. She's fully in the conversation now. I think it depends on the individual, she says. Not everyone approaches it the same way. Sunny responds, but the system often protects those individuals, regardless of their intentions. Another pause. This one feels heavier than the last. One of the co-hosts finally steps in more assertively. Okay, I think we're getting into a really important, but also very layered, discussion here. And I want to make sure we're also giving space to talk about the work itself, because that's why you're here today. Margot nods politely. Of course. Sunny leans back slightly, but she doesn't disengage completely. The host continues, because regardless of the broader conversation, the film itself is being talked about a lot. What do you hope audiences take away from it? Margot takes a moment before answering, almost as if resetting internally. I hope they feel seen, she says. I hope they feel like their experiences matter, and that they're reflected on screen. Sunny looks at her again, her tone quieter now, but still pointed. And if someone watches it and doesn't feel that way? Margot answers gently but firmly. Then that's something I'd want to understand. Sunny nods. That's important. For a brief moment, the tension softens, but it doesn't disappear. Another host smiles, trying to bring some warmth back. You know, one thing I do appreciate is that you're not shying away from this conversation. Margot gives a small smile. I don't think there's any benefit in avoiding it. Sunny adds, agreed. But then she continues, almost as an afterthought, though it clearly isn't. Although, Sunny says, having the conversation is one thing. Being willing to hear uncomfortable truths is another. There's another reaction from the audience. Margot nods slowly. I hear that. Sunny watches her closely. Do you? That question lands with a different kind of weight, not confrontational, but deeply probing. Margot's expression shifts, just slightly, but enough to show she's feeling the pressure now. I think I do, she says. But I'm also human. I'm still learning. That response draws a mix of reactions, some applause, some thoughtful silence. Sunny softens just a fraction. We're all still learning, she says. For the first time in a while, there's a sense of shared ground, but it's fragile. One of the co-hosts quickly takes advantage of that moment. And that's probably a good place for us to pause this part of the conversation, she says with a light laugh. Because I feel like we could go on for another hour. That gets some laughter from the audience. Margot smiles slightly. Probably, she says. Sunny nods. Definitely. But even as the laughter fades, the atmosphere hasn't fully reset. There's still something unresolved, something lingering beneath the surface. The camera cuts briefly to the audience, where people are whispering to each other, clearly reacting to what they've just witnessed. Back at the table, the hosts exchange quick glances, subtle but telling. This wasn't planned. This wasn't rehearsed. And it's not over yet. The energy doesn't fully settle even as the segment begins to wind down. You can tell the producers are probably in everyone's earpieces, trying to guide things toward a close. But the atmosphere at the table still carries the weight of everything that's been said. The audience isn't clapping as loudly as before. They're watching, thinking, processing. One of the co-hosts finally steps in with a softer tone. All right, before we wrap, I just want to say, this has been a really honest conversation. Margot Robbie nods, her posture still composed, though there's a visible seriousness in her expression now. Yeah, it has. Sunny Hostin glances at her briefly, then back toward the table. And I think honesty is important, she adds, even when it's uncomfortable. A few audience members clap, but it's more measured this time. Not the usual upbeat applause, more reflective. Another host smiles, trying to lift the mood just slightly. We don't always get moments like this on The View, she says. But when we do, they matter. Margot exhales quietly, almost like she's been holding tension she didn't expect to feel walking into the show. I agree, she says. And I appreciate being able to have the conversation, even if it wasn't what I expected. That line gets a small ripple of laughter from the audience, breaking the tension just enough. Sunny allows a faint smile. I don't think any of us expected it, she says. One of the co-hosts turns back to Margot. Before we let you go, what's next for you? What should people look out for? Margot shifts slightly, almost relieved to touch on something more familiar again. But she doesn't fully leave the earlier tone behind. There are a few projects in development, she says. And I think, after conversations like this, it makes me even more aware of the responsibility that comes with them. Sunny nods once, acknowledging that answer. And hopefully, Margot continues, we can keep pushing things forward, even if it's not perfect. Sunny responds, quieter now. Progress rarely is. There's a brief silence, but this one feels different. Not tense, more settled, even if not fully resolved. The host smiles toward the camera. All right, we're going to take a quick break. But thank you again to Margot for joining us. The audience applauds, stronger now, but still layered with everything that's just unfolded. As the cameras begin to pull back, you can see the hosts lean slightly toward each other, exchanging quick off-mic comments. Margot says something quietly to one of them, and Sunny gives a small nod. Nothing dramatic, but enough to suggest there's no personal hostility lingering, just a serious conversation that played out in real time. The show cuts to commercial. But that's not where the story ends. Because within minutes of the segment airing, clips start circulating online. Short excerpts, particularly the more pointed exchanges between Margot and Sunny, begin appearing across social platforms. Viewers are already reacting, analyzing tone, body language, word choices. Some clips highlight Sunny's sharper questions. Her but meaningful for who? Moment. Her discomfort for who? Line. Others focus on Margot's responses. Her insistence on trying to create change within the system, her acknowledgement that she's still learning. And almost immediately, the reactions split. Some viewers praise Sunny for holding the conversation accountable, calling her questions necessary, even overdue. Others feel she pushed too hard, too quickly, especially for what was expected to be a promotional interview. At the same time, Margot's responses start getting dissected. Some people appreciate her composure, the way she stayed engaged without shutting down. Others question whether her answers went far enough, or if they stayed too safe. Within an hour, the segment is trending. Clips from The View are being reposted with captions, commentary, reaction videos. YouTube channels start breaking down the exchange. TikTok clips rack up thousands, then hundreds of thousands of views. Backstage, according to reports later shared by audience members, the mood was calm, but reflective. Margot reportedly spent a few extra minutes speaking with the hosts after the cameras stopped rolling. Nothing heated, nothing dramatic, just a continuation of the conversation, but in a quieter, more private tone. Sunny, too, was said to be composed. No raised voices, no confrontation off camera. Just a serious discussion that stayed serious, even after the lights dimmed. By the afternoon, headlines begin to appear. Some frame it as a tense moment. Others call it a necessary conversation. A few go further, labeling it a clash. But those who watched the full segment know it wasn't an explosion. It was something more subtle, more real. A disagreement that didn't resolve neatly. And that's exactly why it kept spreading. Because viewers could see themselves in it, on both sides. The questions, the answers, the pauses, the moments where neither side fully gave in. Later that day, brief statements begin circulating from sources close to the show, emphasizing that conversations like this are part of what The View is meant to do. Create space for dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable. Margot doesn't immediately post about the segment, but when she does, it's brief. A simple acknowledgement of the discussion, and a note about the importance of listening and continuing to learn. Sunny, on the other hand, addresses it more directly during a later episode, briefly mentioning the interview and reinforcing why she asked the questions she did. Neither backs down, but neither escalates either. And that balance between tension and respect is what keeps people talking. Because in a world where interviews are often polished and predictable, this one wasn't. It felt unscripted. It felt human. And whether viewers agreed with Sunny, with Margot, or somewhere in between, they watched. They reacted. And they kept the conversation going long after the cameras stopped. So what do you think? Was this a necessary conversation that needed to happen on live television? Or did it cross the line for a morning talk show interview? Share your opinion in the comments, and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.